G&T show is intended for mature audiences. Parental discussion is advice. Live long and prosper.
Friends with benefits.
Speaking of having a good time, Terry.
Dayton broke the G&T show. This is now the David Mack
Appreciation Hour.
What is it about this guy that people love him so much?
With his purple velvet cape and his crown. I thought it was a little much when he had us carry him in the studio on a throne. I am awesome! Look what I have done! Look what I have brought upon the world!
There is an urge to go nya 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 nya.
I heard rumors that you might be working on something else, but we won't prod much. I'm going to say it.
I'm going to pry a little.
Dare you! How dare you ask me to change it? Do you not understand the majesty of my genius? And the guy sitting next to me looked at me like he was, like I'd crapped in his hat.
Yeah, it's the professionalism that sells the show. That's right.
Welcome to the G&T Show Supplemental Log. I'm Mike. I forgot who I was. I'm Mike, Ceridium. We are at Cryptic Studios, and I have the pleasure to sit down and speak with JHeinig, content designer. Is that correct?
This week it is. I'm a switch hitter. I go between content and systems as the need arises.
Oh, right on. Well, welcome. Thank you for taking the time to sit down with us.
Thanks for coming out, Mike.
So when you're as content designer, you're involved in the story,
yes.
At least in terms of how it's put together, how it actually comes out towards the end, right?
Yes.
Can you describe some of that process for us?
Sure. So our writer, Christine Thompson, puts together the general beats of the story, and she, along with our leads, oversees the general arc of how a story is going to unfold. We're going to say, here's the story we're telling in season 10 or season 11. This is what's going to happen during this exploration of the Klingon War or the Iconian War, or during whatever happens to be the story for that season. Christine will take the overall story idea and she'll break it down into individual episodes and beats for the story. And then each of these episodes, she'll outline, here's the things that need to happen for this story to move forward. Here's the characters we have to introduce. Here's the conflicts that we have to show. And then here are the hurdles that the player is going to have to deal with that move that story forward. So, for instance, in what's a good example? The recent episode where you wind up meeting up with Sela while she's on the run. Everyone's probably played this one recently. The general story outline for that would say, okay, Sela has escaped, so the player meets up with Sela, and then for various reasons, the player and Sela wind up involved in various shenanigans investigating information that Sela claims to have about the Iconians and the threat that they represent, and something that the player doesn't know yet. And eventually it turns out to be true, and you see the Iconian invasion sphere, and you escape with your life, but just in the nick of time, but Sela gets away in the process. And so that re-establishes Sela is coming back into the story, and then we're establishing another part of the Iconian threat and advancing the Iconian War, because at the end of this, Iconians jump the sphere into Iconian space, and then Sela escapes and is at large again. Good job, Captain. And then the content designer's job is to take those general outlines and break them down into the individual story beats and the game elements that say, okay, so this is the part where the player has a conversation with Sela when he runs into her again, and here's where they go. So it was my decision to say, okay, after you encounter Sela at Hobus, then you go to Nopata, because that makes sense, because there's another Iconian gate there, and since you've already been through the Romulan stories, you know about it. And so we get to go through the Nopata map and get back into Hakib's lab and use the gateway there, and then go to the Iconian invasion sphere, which is an all-new map. And so that gives us sort of an idea of what kind of assets playwrights will need, what the artists will have to make, and the as a designer, I get to decide, here's sort of the pacing. If there's going to be, fight through the old facility in the Hobus system and find Sela there is the big payoff at the end of that, and then go to Nopata system and figure out how to get into Keeve's secret lab and activate things there, and there's the big turn there, which is another payoff, and then you go through to the invasion sphere and you have the big reveal. You see Terrace, you see the Heralds for the first time, you see the invasion fleet, and there's the big payoff there of, wow, everything Sela was saying is true. I may not like her, but she was right. And then she gets away. So you end the episode, hopefully, with more of an idea that Sela may be someone that you can love to hate, but she is not dumb and she has a pretty good idea of what was going on, and reinforcing this is the threat that the Iconians represent, and it's way bigger than anything anyone thought. So that's generally the process is we take this general story notes that Christine says, here's the characters, here's the beats, and then the content designer gets to say, okay, here's how I pace them out throughout that episode. And then we build all of the logic and all of the encounters and so on that are necessary to do so.
Interesting. So it seems like you are responsible for a large portion of the story that the player actually gets to see and interact with, in terms of its pacing and I guess some of the things that we encounter as we play a mission.
This can be true. So Christine will often give us specific notes and say, okay, this needs to be Sela because we're going to do these things with her later on. But we have a lot of creative freedom to then introduce other secondary elements if we want to create some interesting dramatic twists, like, someone that you have trusted and been on several missions with suddenly turns on you and you don't know why. That's not part of the initial story outline, but it was there so that it could add this dramatic twist that also underscores that this mission is really got themes about who do you trust, who's telling you the truth, how serious are things really? So designers can take that in different directions depending on the way that they want to do things. I'm fond of looking for opportunities to tell interesting stories that deal with a theme like that in a consistent way, or that deal with Star Trekian themes of how is this going to affect us as people? What have we learned about ourselves and what we're committed to today, and so on. And other designers have other impetus. But yes, we get a lot of latitude to say, I think that this is a moment that's important for me to focus on and create a new dilemma, whereas this might be a moment where we say, okay, and here is a pretty standard space battle. It might be you enter the mission and, oh, look, there's Cardassians in a fight with Romulans, and they're Romulan Republic guys, so you want to fight the Cardassian Trueway guys. And that doesn't have a lot of story, and it doesn't require a lot of investment. But if that's just the way you open the mission, it's, starts your pacing off low. Okay, here's something that we've seen before. It's a known quantity, easy to build, easy for players to get. And then we start moving into the custom story beats. And designers get a lot of opportunity to decide, this is where I really want to spend my dollars and spend my time to make something that looks cool.
Right on. Very cool. Let's see. So you're a fan of Star Trek.
Oh, yes.
Your favorite series?
It varies over time, partly because I've been around long enough that new series have come out in my lifetime, of course, and partly because tastes change over time. Right now, I would say that my favorite series is probably the original series, just because I really like, even though there are things that in it that look goofy from our modern perspective, I really like that for its era, they went out and they took risks about their storytelling and said, we're going to just show you crazy stuff and see what sticks. But I have certainly special moments in all the different series that resonate with me or that I really enjoy. Like, my favorite character comes from Voyager, and some of my favorite episode beats come from DS9. So, that's one of those tough questions, I think, for someone who is really immersed in a lot of Star Trek. Each of those series has its own flavor and has its own charm. And it might be, in some ways, like saying, okay, so which do you like more, apples or sausages? They're for different sorts of things. You consume them both. But...
True. So I also take it that you're into other varieties of science fiction. What are some of your favorite shows, books?
I absolutely adore just consuming all kinds of science fiction. And I've been through through, I've seen Star Wars and read a bunch of the expanded universe and watched all of Babylon 5 and Farscape and seen all of Lex, thanks to the disembodied voice, and Red Dwarf. In literature, things that have never been put to the screen, I loved Isaac Asimov's Foundation series and his Robots and Empire. I actually read the Empire trilogy, which is pretty hard to find these days. I guess you could probably get it in ebook format, though. There's a specific book by not Heinlein, although I've read a lot of Heinlein as well. There's a specific book by Zelazny, I want to say, Lord of Light, which is fantastic, and I recommend that to all science fiction readers. I think that there's sort of a thread that Star Trek really epitomizes in science fiction from the rocket age, from the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. It's very hopeful. It says, in the world of tomorrow, first, there's going to be a tomorrow, and second, it's going to be better than today, and maybe there's going to be dystopian elements, but we're going to go travel in space, and we're going to have amazing new advances in medicine and psychology and in food production and industrial machinery and whatever, and just we're going to be living in a better world and making things better. And I really like that sort of hopeful underpinning to a lot of science fiction, which means it's kind of an interesting twist that I also enjoy the post-apocalyptic science fiction genre, the Mad Max style stuff, but for different reasons, I think, than I grab onto those. But yeah, I tend to be a fan of a lot of the literary classics of science fiction.
Very cool, very cool. I've known you for a while, and I know that you're also heavy into fantasy and LARPing and other similar activities. There's a question in here somewhere.
What the hell is wrong with you?
What's the connection?
Yeah, I mean, what is it about some of these different activities or different genres that you find interesting or fascinating?
All of these science fiction and fantasy alike are about stories of ways that the world might have been or ways that the world could be different. And they are all ways to engage your imagination in thinking about events or people or themes that might not be real, but maybe under other circumstances could have been. And sometimes they're a way to explore elements of the real world in a different context, to say, what if we want to do like the original series of Star Trek did, and we want to tackle class struggle like they do in the Cloudminders, which is essentially Metropolis remade, or we want to deal with racism and we deal with people who are white on one side and black on the other. Instead of making it these people are white and these are black, they put the division like front and center there. And so you can explore stories that are not just about the world as it is, but the world as it might be, or the world as it could have been,
or other worlds that might exist at the same time yours does.
And in all of these genres, this means that you have an opportunity to say nothing's inevitable, nothing is impossible, and there are a myriad ways to look at the world and to look at life and to approach it and find the things that really speak to you and resonate with you and say, these are great ideas, and take those ideas with you. When you watch Star Trek and you watch these sorts of hopeful episodes about explorers going out to learn about the universe and learn about themselves in the process, this is an inspirational idea. Star Trek heroes are often aspirational heroes. There's the famous story about Nichelle Nichols wanting to quit after the first season of the original series, and then Martin Luther King Jr. came to her and said, you can't quit. You're showing people that this world can be better, that diversity can really happen, that there can be a woman of color on television in a position where she's a professional and people take her seriously.
And equal to almost everyone else.
Right.
Yeah.
And Whoopi Goldberg says that was an inspirational moment for her too, and that was one of the reasons she loved Star Trek and became Guinan, is she tells a story that when she was a kid, she saw the original Star Trek and then she ran out to the kitchen to grab her mom and said, Mama, come look at the television. There's a black woman on the TV and she ain't no maid. And
yeah, that's exactly. Yeah.
So fantasy and science fiction are great avenues for us to explore these what ifs, and for these what ifs to inspire how can we make our own world better.
Right.
That is a great answer. And yeah, I mean, you're right. They can show us, how we can be better, how we can improve ourselves, and by telling these stories in a fantastic way, but they shed light on who we are as a people.
One of the other important things for fantasy and science fiction to do is to present to us new things that we as viewers or consumers of these media haven't seen before. There's a trap sometimes that people will get caught in of saying, I want more of the same. I want another sequel. I want another remake of this story or whatever. I want this to be, the X entry in the same franchise with all the same things. But we need new things as well. We need new ideas. We need things that show us things that we never would have imagined on our own. And every person out there has different ideas and has lived different experiences. And by sharing those sorts of things, we can give ourselves inspiration for new ideas that can open up opportunities that we might not have imagined. I think that's really an important thing for science fiction and fantasy to do. Yes, we want to see characters that we love in situations that resonate with us, with their familiar, but there's also room for writers to occasionally show you something that just makes you go, wow, I never would have thought of that before.
Yeah. So I'm getting the impression that you're not a fan of, well, I don't know if that's the correct way to phrase it, but you're not a fan of the constant reboots or the constant, sequels that we keep getting from Hollywood. And it's almost like a production line.
With so many good ideas out there, just decades of great material and great ideas and inspiration, and I feel like they use it as a spice to something that's just a reboot of something else versus making it something completely on its own. Like, we saw a lot of very original things come out of the 80s and early 90s. Things that were not reboot, just very original ideas. Maybe it came from a source like a book, but it was one world, with one mind behind it, reflecting many different ideas, but contained within a very easy to access story, even concepts that are beyond us that we could easily grasp because of the way they were presented. And I feel like those are seen as those moments are seen as little assets for very overused stories now. So they'll use that, and someone will see that and go, that was a great movie because of this one moment, but they don't understand the whole picture. I understand for kids who may have not seen, a variety of things yet. So to them, everything is very new. But I like giving a source credit where it's due.
Sure. I'm not like categorically opposed to reboots and remakes, but I think that there are cases where folks will sort of miss the boat. One of the key examples of this was Watchmen, the graphic novel that later got turned into a movie.
Okay.
And Alan Moore, who was the writer for Watchmen, and the artist Dave Gibbons famously went on record saying that they didn't think that you could really turn Watchmen into a movie. And that's categorically untrue. You can, of course, make a movie and put a Watchmen title on it and include the characters in the story. But Moore and Gibbons did things that were specific to the medium. There's a part of the comic where they did an issue where the layout of the panels is mirrored. So you start on the first page and all the panel layouts there are mirrored on the last page. And as you move to the middle of the comic, you get to the climax where it reveals, it doesn't tell you this, but you figure it out later, reveals to you who the real villain of the piece is. And as Gibbons famously said, we put this guy with a giant arrow pointing at him while he's killing someone. But this is not something that is as simple to do in a movie. Could you do this by having like all of your shots composited so they're mirror images of each other as you go through the film? I suppose you could do something like that, but they really took the peculiarities of a particular medium and explored it in a specific way. And then moving to the big screen meant not being able to have those nuances of the medium. And instead, Zack Snyder, would have to focus on what you can do in a movie. And I think there are some people who get hung up on, I read this book, I read this comic, whatever, and I want to see a movie of it, and it has to be an exact frame by frame, panel for panel, accurate adaptation of what I saw there, without realizing that the different medium can do different things. When it comes to just doing like reboots of a franchise, I think that a lot of the message that we get out of stories is relevant to us based on the cultures and the times that we live in. It's really hard to get people in the modern era, especially generations younger than us, to connect with the original Star Trek series. They don't live in the Cold War. They are not living in a time where the computer is a brand new device. Space travel has just happened and we saw people walking on the moon for the first time, and technology is either going to save us or destroy it. Well, the technology came and went. We decided decided that space travel was too expensive, and instead we focused on making your cell phones smaller, faster, and better at sharing pictures of cats. So the sorts of anxieties, some of the things that Star Trek talked about in the original series are relevant today. Some of the things it talked about are less relevant today, or are not the sorts of things people think about. So it's hard to sell people on those kinds of stories. So when you are talking about doing new Star Trek TV shows or reboots of any other old property, you have to be mindful of, okay, what is the message that I'm going to try and sell today? If we're going to give people new ideas, then we have to talk about things in a context that fits the time that we live in. There was a science fiction novel I read recently, Planet Adventure series by Jack Vance, and it's got a character who's flying around in his personal spaceship going from star system to star system because he's got faster than light travel and ray guns and all sorts of science fiction stuff. And at one point, he has to do a bunch of computations, and he does it with a slide rule because computers hadn't been invented. You can't just remake that and have it be the exact same thing. So I think there's room for remakes to do something new and interesting with a property. But I think that if you do that you need to have a keen eye to what's the real underlying message that I'm trying to sell, and how do I get that message to resonate with people.
Right. I think they tend to, when they do reboots now, is they change the message, thinking that maybe that's not relevant when that was the heart or the soul of something, and all they need to do is maybe change some of that or maybe some of the lingo. But there's a lot of lingo that can keep the attitude of a character, the personality, or even the desires of a character, with their heart, and still make it work so that it doesn't sound like it's out of sync to what it should be. There's a lot of movies now too that make a lot of modern jokes where like the original didn't make so many modern jokes. It's sort of like it's making fun of itself, but it's doing it too much so that you're not immersed in the world anymore. You're just waiting for the next joke. And what was so great about some of the originals was that you weren't waiting for the next joke. It was funny because you were immersed, and they took that and went, oh look, they're laughing at that. Well, let's make that a joke in the reboot, and then it's very surface. So I don't find myself diving as deep into most movies now because of that.
I'll take a little risk and explain a little bit.
Okay.
There's a bunch of Star Trek fan film production right now, and hopefully your listeners have seen a bunch of them. And if not, go look for them. They're fantastic.
We talk about them. Yes, we talk about them often.
But for various reasons that may involve legal departments and whatnot, I really shouldn't name things by name and so on. But there are a number of projects that have amazing fidelity. The amount of material needed to do great effects and video editing and filmmaking has really dropped with the advent of powerful home computers, and now people are making these amazing shows and movies out of these fan communities, and they choose what sort of things they want to focus on. And so you might have some people who say, we want to focus on what sorts of stories were being told with the original series of Star Trek. What was the rest of the 5-year mission that we missed? Or, okay, what would Star Trek look like if Star Trek were a war story? Or, okay, let's look at the seamy underbelly of Star Trek. There were hints of it in Deep Space Nine with Section 31 and episodes like In the Pale Moonlight. So what is it like to be someone who lives in the Star Trek future, but that's the part of the world that they live in? And the productions are excellent, and the actors are fantastic, and there's a lot of famous names and a lot of friendly, familiar faces from the Star Trek franchise involved in this. So well worth your time to watch. But you always have to then say, what's the message that they're saying here? If you're telling a war story, are you telling a Star Trek story? Star Trek has had war stories, Sacrifice of Angels in DS9, having huge space battles and things like that. But is that the hopeful future that Star Trek was looking for? I don't know. What do the characters get out of it? Does war, what do they learn from the war? And what is the viewer supposed to take away from that? Arguably, I would think that for the Federation's point of view, the idea of the enlightened humans of the 23rd, 24th, and later centuries, war is not something that they glorify or seek out. And so, again, what's the message? How does it go with the media? If you're telling stories about these black operations teams, is that like, we're doing this because the fate of the galaxy depends on it? Is anyone going to ask the question of, if we compromise our morals to accomplish this, then what's the point in having that sort of moral code? Are we going to have a future, but at the cost of not being the people that we were committed to being, and not being the good folks we thought we were going to be? These are interesting questions to ask, and I think that when you want to do a reboot or a remake, or when you want to make a spin-off of a property, that you should take the message of that property, and then you should really get into those meaty questions. and ask them, and maybe even answer them in the course of that production and say, yes, okay, in the Star Trek world, these sorts of things do exist, and here's how people feel about them. And you might say, for instance, and here's why Starfleet doesn't do Black Ops and says this is the wrong thing to do. That's a super Star Trek thing to do, to have Kirk and Spock and McCoy say, what is our problem? And Spock says, here's the practical solution. And McCoy says, well, my emotions say we can't do that because it's the wrong thing to do.
The moral thing would be this.
And the characters have to arrive at some balance or compromise and realize that what is the right thing to do. And so I think that is something that's fundamental to Star Trek stories, is exploring what is the right thing to do.
From many perspectives
and then reaching that
potential
destination.
Perspectives. I've always liked the way that similarly Twilight Zone episodes would end, or how they would build up. So like the original Star Trek and the original Twilight Zone, those two series were big in my life growing up, huge. And I felt like the Next Generation really captured those elements. They just had some, between the imagery and really weird things that they would get you to think about, including episodes where you would go into their heads, and there were some very weird, really cool things to explore there too. And I felt like DS9 didn't go into as much of that, but it was great for, it wasn't really touching upon that, but they would still have the moral dilemma, or the let's see what this looked like through different cultures' eyes. Let's see where maybe we can come to a middle ground. So there was a lot of that, which is very relevant to us today, I think, and on our planet. So I liked it because of that. So they all have a really good message, and I would have liked to see like the new Star Trek movies capture that, what's really relevant to us, because it was a great movie. It just wasn't a Star Trek movie. And someone could argue and say, but it has a Star Trek name, so it's a Star Trek movie. But it didn't capture those things that I felt were relevant to our interests or to our fears or our dreams, and they certainly didn't explore. So, but they did. They had a great cast. I think they were cast perfectly. I just think that the writing wasn't what it should have been.
Well, hopefully this third one will. I mean, I'm hearing some good things.
We'll see what happens. See what Simon Pegg delivers.
Sure, yeah.
Simon Pegg, and then
no idea.
Justin Lin. I have to admit that when I found out that kind of for me, it kind of made up for JJ not being one. So it's balanced it out at this point. And I'm much more optimistic. No.
There's an episode we have coming out later this year where in design we had a discussion, and we said, okay, so the player gets to this point in the mission, and then you are confronted with, here's the way things could unfold, and we could do this thing which might be really risky to us to do, and it might result in really bad consequences, but it is clearly like the correct thing to do right now in the moment. Or option B, which is, this could save a lot of people in a very practical sense, needs of the many sort of way, but to do it I have to do something awful. I have to kick a lot of puppies right now. And we discussed, okay, how do we present this choice to the player? And what we eventually arrived at is, this is Star Trek. This is not a different game franchise. We don't present that choice to the player. We move you through the episode showing you the options that could happen, and then we say, because this is Star Trek, you're going to do the right thing. And it may have consequences, and it may have costs for you. You're going to do it because it's the right thing. We're going to show you why it's the right thing. And I think that's one of the things that sets us apart from other game franchises, is that while we do like to let players sometimes flavor their choices with, I play a very science-oriented captain, I play a very aggressive captain, your dialogue choices sometimes get to reflect this. We always want to sort of underscore with like, here's what the angels of our better nature would ultimately say, and here's how our conscience would guide us in the 24th, 25th century.
There was an episode in the Delta arc where one episode, we were given basically what seemed like a choice. We could either do the right thing, we could do the convenient thing, or we can do the other thing. And obviously going through that, we're faced with this choice, and immediately after that, it seems like we are dealing with the consequences of that choice, whether or not. And it made me wonder, if I had chosen differently, would this next mission have changed? Now, granted, I made what I believed was the right choice, and the mission played out a very certain way that I thought fit perfectly. But I do appreciate, especially because this is a Star Trek game, that we do have those that we do face those moral dilemmas, that we do have the opportunity to make the right choice, and that those choices can have consequences consequences. So I do appreciate that is something that Stowe is thinking about, that is trying to include. And in the most recent featured episode, the inclusion of LGBT characters, I absolutely appreciated, because it kind of, again, it shed light on important characters, showing that they belong, and
showing that these people exist. They have a place in the world.
Yes.
And that as far as the folks of the future are concerned, it's really a non-issue.
It's a non-issue.
All right, you're here, you're part of the job. All right, let's get the job done.
Yeah. So I appreciate everything that Stowe is doing to really stay true to what Star Trek is all about.
Yeah. Sometimes we get flack from folks who say, wow, you sure blew up a lot of Romulan ships there and sent hundreds of people to screaming fiery deaths in space, and that is a tough line that we have to walk. And we are a video game that has gamey elements that the mainstream gamer has to engage with, but we also are Star Trek,
and your stories do reflect that.
We want to try to cleave to that bar where we can and say, okay, we're going to tell a story that talks about things in the Star Trek movie and talks about events and people, and then examines and grapples with those issues in a way that is interesting or informative.
Very, very cool. You are also a writer. You've written a few of the Star Trek magazine stories.
I've written one story for Star Trek magazine. It was a two-parter, and a lot of books for the game industry.
Okay. So if you were given the opportunity to write an open-ended series based on one character and Trek, who would it be?
Man, that's not a fair question. So the character that I would really want to explore would not be great for a series and is already dead. But I have a weird sort of interest in the character Lon Suitor from Voyager.
Oh, interesting.
He appears in 3 episodes. He dies in Basics Part 2, being a hero.
He's the Betazoid with the...
He's a Betazoid sociopath, played by Brad Dourif, who's an excellent character actor. Actually, when I originally did Mindscape, the episode where you're in Tuvok's head in a mind meld, my original pitch was that the person that you get to help you in Tuvok's mind is Lon Suitor. But
that would have been awesome.
Because they had previously
mind melded. Oh my gosh. That would have been awesome.
But, I mean, how are we going to get Brad Dourif into it? Also, he's not really a famous character like Seven of Nine or Neelix.
Yeah.
Anyway.
But that would have, that would have changed that whole episode.
Yeah. Not the sort of character that you can really do a huge open-ended series on. Okay. Let's pick a character that you could functionally do an open-ended series on. From any of the original shows, right? The television stuff. Man, whoever I pick, the audience is going to flagellate me. Why didn't you pick, this is just more evidence that Cryptic hates Klingons. Oh man, a lot of my favorite sort of side characters wound up dead. I wonder what this is.
Well, it could be a prequel series leading up to the moment.
Sure.
Right. Well, I always appreciated, there was an interview with Casey Biggs where he talked about playing Damar, and he said that he's doing yet another scene where Damar's getting drunk, and Biggs is trying to get in the mindset of the character, and he's like, why is Damar drinking so much? And he goes, because he has a conscience, and that was the moment that he figured out that Damar was not cool with what Dukat was doing, and it started his heel face turn, his change to become the resistance leader, and gave him an interest in Star Trek. And I always found that kind of fascinating. So I would do Lal, Data's daughter. I would reboot Lal, and then I would do some stuff dealing with her return to consciousness. It's been 35 years. Someone's worked it out. They fix her. They reboot her brain. They download the memories back from Data's repository, and ding! Hey, Lal, we fixed your little neural problem. You're on again. And now go and learn to be a person, and do that sort of story of learning to be a person. And she's a great character because not only of her connection to Data and the fact that she feels things in a way that her father couldn't, but she gives you that great outsider perspective on Star Trek. She is seeing this world for the first time. Everything is new to her. And so she gives you that narrative opportunity for her to ask questions. Why are things this way? How come we do things this way? What does this mean? And then people have to show her or explain to her how the world works and why you made the choices that arrived at where it is. And she gets to do the same sort of thing that both Data and Spock did in their respective roles in Star Trek of being this character who's possessed of these phenomenal abilities from a human perspective, but still has things to learn from humans and from humanity as a whole, and has to figure out, how do I put these abilities to their best use? How do I become the best person that I can be? What does it mean to be a person? And how do I decide where I fit with respect to humans? Am I going to try and become a human? Am I going to reject it? Am I going to be something else? Am I going to create a synthesis of what my father was, an android, and what humans are, these creatures with feelings and hopes and dreams and stuff, and find some way to combine the two and create something new? I think that would be an interesting character to watch.
I agree. Oh, wow. Very, very, very well said. Let's see. What is the name of your starship?
My current ship that I'm flying is the USS Satok. It's named for an obscure Vulcan philosopher who shows up in some of the soft canon. I'm using currently a Scryer class intelligence science vessel. But I recently powered through a bunch of other ships, unlocking starship mastery traits. The most recent one that I was using was a Manticore, the new T6 Manticore destroyer, which I named the Tzitzimitl, which is a monster out of Aztec folklore.
Very cool.
Like him and Maria are both like, bam.
I know. Awesome.
We got our depth to our ship names. Well, the USS ship was the favorite.
That was awesome.
Ship was great. But yeah, we have the Chimera and we have the Manticore, and I was like, I gotta name it after a monster, but it has to be something obscure.
And that it was awesome. Let's see. Have you written, let's see, is there a genre that you haven't written for yet that you would love to try?
Oh, interesting question. You're going to have to edit out all of this silence as I think about the question. Because, I mean, I've written some science fiction, I've written fantasy, I've written post-apocalyptic. And then genres that I haven't written for are largely because, like, I'm not interested in writing for paranormal romance, for example. And I'm doing a little bit of work on some pseudo-historical fiction, but it's not done yet. I'm yet ready for prime time.
I like how you look at me when you say, supernatural romance and prime time.
Yeah, well.
I get these looks my way. I'm like, I don't know what it means.
It means I saw you reading Twilight.
Oh, you did not see me reading Twilight.
I know I didn't see you reading Twilight, but it was funny to say.
So, but I did read it.
Twilight is what came to my mind when you said that.
Someone told me to read it, so I read it before the movies happened. So,
At least it was before the movies.
Yeah.
I really would like to be able to write magical realism. There's a fantastic story called Tlon Ukbar Orbis Tertius. And it's a story of these philosophers sort of philosophizing about an alternate version of Earth with its own names and continents and languages and things like that, and discovering that as they elaborate upon it, it starts becoming true. And they start by finding this book in a library that is ostensibly an atlas of this world. And as they read about it and speculate about it, it causes more and more things in our world to become that world. And it's really kind of a mind trip. It's pretty fantastic.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
I want to check that.
Yeah, and so there's an entire genre of stuff like that I would love to be able to write for, and I say solely because I think that's not really where my skills lie. I find it fascinating. I think it would be very hard for me to write something on that level. It's similar to a lot of Philip K. Dick stuff where there's the idea that the world that we're seeing or experiencing isn't the real world or whatnot. Like the idea of there being a library that exists that has within it every combination of every symbol that has ever been written. So you can find any book in this library, but it's not cataloged. I mean, there is a catalog for the library because every book that could ever possibly be written exists somewhere in it. But there's also an infinite number of catalogs that are wrong. So good luck.
Interesting.
Yeah, weird thought experiment-y type
That's
stuff.
That's really cool. Wow. I love that stuff.
What authors' books do you run out to get when they were released?
Well, until recently, Ian Banks. Unfortunately, we lost him to cancer. And we lost Sir Terry Gilliam as well. No, wait, not Gilliam. No, Gilliam's still alive. Yeah. That's right, because someone apparently ponied up money for him to try and finish Man from La Mancha again. No, it was Pratchett, unfortunately, that we lost. So, man, all my favorite authors are dying. Must be getting old.
Time to write.
Yeah. So, unfortunately, I have not had anything that made me, rush out to get a book lately. And, I mean, with the caveat that I don't have to rush out to get Star Trek novels with David Mack and whatnot, because they send them to us.
Who are some of your favorite authors then? Let's word it that way.
I love the language used by Gene. Wow. I love the language used by Gene Wolfe, especially in his 4-book series, The Book of the New Earth, or Earth of the New Sun series. I think that Asimov was a very strong writer as well. Are we running out of battery power or something?
No, someone keeps messaging me on Messenger. They're having a conversation. It might be George.
Well, you're not on the chat group anymore though. You could just mute conversation. We were like, why did he leave? You could have just muted it.
It's different conversations.
Oh. Yeah, you could just mute.
Let me just turn it off for the moment. Sorry, I apologize.
No problem. Yeah, so, Gene Wolfe. I think Asimov's a super powerful writer. I like Clark as well. Rendezvous with Rama, and so on, and a million other things.
Kind of Bradbury.
Bradbury's also fantastic. And like I said before, I really like sort of that classical era of science fiction, and so a lot of my writing tastes are heavily influenced by that. And I'm less involved in more modern science fiction scene stuff. I did read Banks and whatnot. Scalzi's fantastic. And I have kind of mixed feelings about William Gibson. Like, he has an interesting voice, and of course he pretty much single-handedly caused the cyberpunk genre to erupt into being. But I get the sense that he's a weird dude living in a weird future in a weird headspace. Apparently he wrote Neuromancer on a typewriter while talking about computer hackers.
Interesting.
So a lot of those classics, and then a few of the modern writers. I read just recently some of the what was it? Perdido Street Station by China Miéville.
I've read that.
That was fascinating. There's been also some chatter you may have heard recently about the Hugo Awards and Worldcon and whatnot. And I have opinions about that. I've been mostly ducking the books that are on the slate, partly because ballot stuffing and whatnot. The nominating, the questionable process this year. And I've also recently developed this weird sort of fascination with Afrofuturism.
What is that?
So there's an entire sort of subgenre of science fiction that is written from the perspective of here's what happens if people from African culture take that culture and then develop it and become space travelers and move into space, but they take those cultural roots with them instead of just being like, oh, we are people of African heritage who happened to grow up in the US and then became astronauts and went into space. But more of this sort of idea of again, it's a very what if discipline of like, what if we took all of these elements of our culture and we took them with us into space, or what if really all of humanity emerged from the continent of Africa 200,000 years ago, and then there was some great upheaval or whatever, and a bunch of people went off into space, and only a few people were left behind who were not of African descent or what? Who knows? There's basically a lot of speculation about what would our future look like from this different cultural perspective, because a lot of the classical science fiction is admittedly the middle class white man's game.
Light skin privilege.
You look at it's people like Asimov and Heinlein and all of those writers. It's middle class white dudes, and their beliefs run the spectrum of what they believe about politics and inclusiveness and so on, which is cool. And there were some notable outliers who were fantastic who managed to get into the genre, like C.J. Cherryh and Star Trek's D.C. Fontana, an amazing writer who had to use her initials because nobody would accept women in science fiction at the time. There was an interview, I think, in The Captains that Avery Brooks did about this as well, about the phenomenon of minorities just breaking into being able to write science fiction from their different perspective, from what would it be like if this culture or this aspect of society or history was what shaped our future. And so it's like, here's a future world not through the eyes of, written by middle-class white dude, and hearkening back to the idea of new ideas and showing us things we never would have conceived of on our own. Here's people who have experiences that inform a totally different way of looking at the world, and it's eye-opening, and some of it is speculative history. What if the world had been different? Or, here's a thing we're going to say that is clearly not true, but let's pretend it were. And what does that mean for us?
Right on.
Fascinating.
It sounds interesting. Yeah. Final question. We've been here almost an hour. So.
Sorry, man.
But no, this has been great, very informative, and I've been enjoying it. But okay, you were given the green light to kill a major Star Trek canon character.
Ooh,
who would you kill? Who do you want off?
Oh man, who is a real jerk that just has no redeeming qualities?
It could
isn't
be
moving the story.
It could be just an interesting story that would arise from so and so's death.
Right. Yeah, character death is odd because sometimes you kill characters because you have no more use for them, and sometimes you kill characters in order to motivate another character to do something interesting. Let's see. Now I'm sort of going through my mental roster of all of the different characters and whose death would motivate everyone else to do something. Just for fun, I would say kill off Worf so that Michael Dorn gets all pissed off and goes on Twitter and is like, but I'm trying to make a Worf series. Why are you killing me? I think a Worf series would be really amazing to watch, and I have absolutely nothing against it. But I had to say that just because for the joke.
Yes.
Man, I would probably kill off, because we've already killed Spock. We killed Dax, one of them. Wouldn't really be interesting to kill Bashir. You could kill O'Brien again, but I mean, it's just, how do we make O'Brien suffer today? Again.
Yeah.
Voyager, I don't know. You know, you might get some interesting juice. And it's not like I want to kill a Star Trek character because, oh, this is a character that I hate and they have to die. You know, like I thought it was funny when Tuvok kills Neelix and Mel. Funny, but okay. Mm-hmm. You might get some juice out of killing off 7 of 9 because you've got this dynamic between her and Janeway with sort of the mother surrogate daughter dynamic, and Janeway would have to figure out how did she die, what happened there. They had the sort of beginnings of a romance between her and Chakotay.
Yeah.
So Chakotay's involved in what's going on there.
The Doctor had a fling.
The Doctor, and of course the Doctor was heavily involved in all of her bionic business and whatnot. Mm-hmm. I think that would be a character death that would serve to create an interesting story, to get everyone together and say what happened, how did this occur, and what does it mean in terms of where we go.
I thought I turned that off. Oh, I forgot to confirm.
I did.
Oh boy.
Wacky.
But yeah, you're right. I mean, it for the crew of Voyager, it would be one of those events that would kind of get the ball rolling, so to speak.
Bring everyone out of the whatever corners they're in to come back together and say, what happened? How do we... Not because I dislike 7 and I want her to die or anything, but because I think it might
You don't want her to die, but I can't think of another character.
Even for the character of
motivating.
Even for the character of B'Elanna, who did never really quite,
Yeah.
But that would definitely have an impact on her.
So, per your question, I think it would be especially interesting if you did it in the form of sort of a flashbacky episode. It's like 7 of 9 is dead, and then various members of Voyager start getting back into contact with each other because someone is investigating her death, and they start like getting the family back together and saying, how did this happen? And you play through stuff in flashbacks of, this is the events that led up to it. And the nice thing about doing that structure is that then Jerry Ryan gets to, get some more work. She did some work for us and was total professional, totally into the Star Trek. So, it's always risky to say, oh, I would kill this character because then you have made a new enemy of the actor.
If it does something really good and it's a good story, though, then that's like everyone wants to have a nice death because we all know we gotta go at some point. It's nice to know that something can live on beyond you, something useful, something
Star Trek characters don't die.
No, they never
So many Star Trek characters died. We killed Spock, but he got better. We killed Trip in Enterprise.
There's always another dimension.
In the books, he got better.
You can always have the character existing elsewhere if you have to.
But Tasha Yar.
There's always the mirror universe.
Harry Kim gets killed.
Comes back from another dimension.
Jadzia Dax.
But there's another Dax.
Yeah.
Star Trek characters never die. I mean, Kirk, he's still in the Nexus somewhere.
It's true.
So
like the bird landing.
That only happened in this universe.
Star Trek villains certainly die.
Yeah.
Oh,
There was some joke about that's the first time the bridge went on bridge. Where it's like, Kurt's always on the bridge. I forgot how the joke is worded. The first time I heard that.
Bridge on the captain.
Yep.
Yeah. Right on. It's been so much fun. But I think I need to stop the recording.
Yeah. Sorry, Michael.
No. It's been great. Before we go, is there anything about yourself that you would like our listeners to know, or anything that you're working on that you would like to tease our listeners with?
Oh man, the stuff I'm working on, I really cannot tease about. It's just
fair.
Too critical.
That's fair.
And so much to be done still. But just that in love of Star Trek, I hope is infectious. When I'm working on episodes, and this is true for so many of the designers here, it's more than just doing a job. It's this real love of the property that we hope at our best moments to get to shine through. And so for people who read about Star Trek online or on the web or on our forums and go, wow, these developers don't know what they're doing, or they don't get Star Trek, or they obviously aren't fans. We're fans. We watch the show. We love the show. We grew up with the show. I grew up with the show. And, like everyone else in our imperfect 21st century world, we're just doing the best we can with what we've got in order to show you a somewhat better future.
Right on. That is how you go out. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
You bet, Mike. Is there anyone else I could bring in?
Actually, I'm just going to wind up the show.
Okay.
Thank you. This has been GNT Show. I'm Mike Ceridium. Kapla!
Live long and prosper.
Music for the GNT Show is provided by Warp 11, Andrew Allen, Grethor, and 5 Year Mission. This has been a Busy Little Beaver production.